Father, I thank you. I thank you for continuing to move. I thank you for continuing to speak, Lord. I thank you that you are always inviting us, and you're always offering us a path that's maybe contrary to the one that we are on, or contrary to the one that the world gives us. You're always wanting to see the best in us, for us, and you want to work through us. You want us to be healed. You want us to be set free. You want us to carry hope and peace and strength wherever we go, as we represent you, as we represent your kingdom. So God, we offer ourselves up again. You've spoken to us this morning already, God. You've ministered to our hearts so beautifully. Let us never just rush through these moments where you're here. And God, as we open up your word, continue to speak to us, minister to us. Have your way. In Jesus' name. Amen. We're in Matthew chapter 5, and we'll be in verse 31 through 37 if you have your Bibles. And maybe it'll be on the screen as well. But welcome, everybody. My name is Sergio. So glad you're here. So glad you guys are watching. I'm always honored to show up here every Sunday. And honored that God still allows us and invites us to show up. How many, if we were God, we would be like, hey, listen, you take a week off. You have not been up to par. But God's like, no, just keep coming. Keep coming. Jesus is not interested in providing loopholes for us, not in giving, not in life. And so he doesn't want to tell us how to get as close to the line as possible. Have you ever said things like, well, technically it's not fill in the blank. You have to participate without lying. Every head. He said, technically, that's what we call this, and what I'm going to call it today is a loophole. And that's the name of the message, Loopholes. The world tells us and pushes us to be like, hey, what can I get away with? Our kids do the same thing, right? What can I get away with? But tradition does something else. Tradition says, what have I always done? And we just step into that. Religion says, and this is where it gets legalistic, what is technically permissible? It's a sure way of saying I'm going to get as close as possible without crossing over. But Jesus offers something else. He says, what does love require? You see, all of these the way that the world teaches us is so centered on I that we can get away from the message of Jesus, and we won't feel like we're trying to create or find a loophole, but we will. Because when you talk about what's best for me, what can I get away with? What have I always done? How close can I get without getting burned? Jesus is saying that that's like the wrong book that you are in. His book is like, what does love require of you? I want us to sit with the question, what does love require of you? Because when you understand and when you begin to filter your life through the question of what does love require of you, you're going to make decisions differently than you have before. And hear me, I'm not saying what does the feeling of love require you, because those are not the same. Loving and feeling, even though they connect, love is not a feeling. We all know that. I just remind us of that. Love is not a feeling. Love is a decision that includes feelings, but they're not directed by feelings, and it's not the foundation of feelings. So this is why Jesus' way is never the easiest way, but it is the way that always leads to life. It's always will lead to life. And so in this passage, Jesus is addressing something that is talking about a particular thing, and we're going to unpack it a little bit. But later on in chapter 19 of Matthew, he actually talks about it even in broader terms, and that's when we'll really step into it. But for today, I just want to focus on one thing and just kind of look at the narrative of this passage And we're just going to read the first two verses in Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 and 32, because Jesus is addressing something that people in his time are looking for loopholes, and so are we. And he says this, "Now it was said, whoever sends his wife away is to give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." And this is going back to Deuteronomy's passage, because it's talking about what Moses was bringing up. And they asked Jesus later on in chapter 19. I'll read it just for a second, but we're not going to land on this big topic this morning, because we're going to talk about loopholes, which is about this, but not strictly this. So in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, we read, "When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens, if she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, that he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her away from his house. And she leaves his house and goes and becomes another man's wife. And the latter husband turns against her, writes a certificate of divorce, and puts it in her hand, and sends her away from his house. Or if the latter husband who took her to be his first wife dies, then her former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled. For that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance." So they are going back and saying, hey, look, as far as we can see, Moses just basically said, and there was two, schools of thoughts with divorce. One was like you can casually divorce basically for any reason, and Jesus addresses that, and we're going to address it here in a second. But another one was like specifically for a specific reason. And what has happened is that the Pharisees and the religious people have taken Moses' command and basically created a loophole that says we can divorce for any reason, because Moses said it. And the thing of it is that Moses did not command it. He regulated divorce in a broken world. So he's never established divorce. God never designed divorce. But Christianity is a real life practice, if you will. It deals with real life, and it deals with sin. And so whenever there's sin is in the picture, you have to deal with it in some way. And what would happen is that if the guy marries the woman, and for some reason something happens, Moses is saying, look, you need to write a certificate of divorce so that she could be released to remarry. Because if you don't, you've put her out to die. So this passage is actually not as much about certificate of divorce to, so that the woman can be married, but it's about protecting the woman so that she just does not get thrown to the side. The certificate protects the vulnerable. So Moses was not like, hey guys, here's your loophole. Moses like, look, we need to protect the women. So offer her a certificate of divorce so that when she remarries, she's not living in adultery. It's a whole different way than just saying, well, let's see here. Like in our time and age, we're like, hey, no fault divorce, just doesn't really matter. It's like we really don't take it as seriously. Why? Because our culture has been driven by it. Tradition has been driven by it. And we come to the place of saying, well, I don't love this person. I can't live with this person. We don't connect. So I'm not going to, for the rest of my life, just be here. I need to be happy. A lot of people are rationalized that way. And so our culture created a thing to say, well, no fault divorce. It wasn't always like that. And so now with a no fault divorce, it's a loophole and everyone takes advantage of it. And the result of it is that majority of families are wrecked because of it. Later on in chapter 19, this is the same topic, and he answers them, because they're asking him about divorce. He answered them and said, have you not read? Basically, he's saying, do you know what God says about this? Have you not opened the scriptures? You're asking me based on the thing that Moses did so that he can protect women. But before Moses, there was my word. Have you not read? That's a confrontational passage. Because technically they should have read. They have read it before, but they have found a loophole. And so Jesus is bypassing this loophole. He says, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them, and here's where we get our genders, male and female. That's it. That's it. And when you combine the two, they don't make a neutral sex. They make either a male or a female. And for centuries, from the beginning, it was always male and female. And it will always be male and female. But there's a loophole in our society where they try to redefine, gender and sex. You can do that. We will watch you burn. Not in hell, but you will reap the consequences of your loophole that you've created. That's going to be the fact. We're going to be dealing with the psychology and the hurt and from all of this abuse and nonsense. And so Jesus is addressing this, but he's not addressing the situation of his time. He's saying, go back to the beginning, because God who made them, he basically says, before there was marriage, he made them one way and another. And for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So that no longer they are two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no person should separate. And so they've done this, and they wrestled with this. They could not do this. So they're like, so they began to divorce, and Moses is like, let's make sure that we can protect the women who the husbands are divorcing. But originally, God said, I did not create like that. So the question is, how do we get here? How is it that we are okay? This is the loop. This is like technically not sin. This is actually for protection. So it's not like a bad thing, but it's not the origin. This is not what God intended, but he creates a way so that sinful humanity can operate. This is why he can use sinful people for his glory. He's not waiting for us to completely see everything. He's not waiting for us to completely mature in everything when he asks us to step out. Because technically, when he saves you, he's inviting you to step out. Because as you step out, as you invite people, as you share your faith, as you give, you are being discipled. So discipleship is not, let's go through some sort of course and study the Bible. That's a part of it. It's more like, now I'm giving my life to Jesus. Now he's going to invite me into what he is doing. So how in the world do we get to a place where we're like, this is enough? Like imagine like when you're going into marriage and you're like, well, if it doesn't work out, I have a way without, disobeying God's law. And that breeds and breeds. And then before you know it, you have all this mess. And so they're like, hey, how many times can we divorce? And what does this look like? And Jesus is like, the problem is not that you're divorcing. The problem is, why are you divorcing? And this is so Jesus. He doesn't address the current conversation. He's not addressing what people, he goes, if you pull back, you have to pull back even more. Because when you pull back to the original of creation, what else did God create? He created the heart. And so later on, in verse 8, he said to them, so they're like, well, why did Moses do this? If it's like, why is there a loophole if we can take advantage of it? And he says, Moses did it for this reason. And this is where the shocker of it all is. He says, Moses did it because of your hardness of heart. He didn't do it because God intended it. He did it to deal with hard hearts. Now, if you want to know what the problem of all marital issues, hard hearts. Like Jesus has a key. How in the world do you fix your marriage? Look at your hard heart. If you look for anybody who's been divorced, people who are divorced, if you begin to look back, all the impact was because of a hard heart. The things that they did, it doesn't mean that, my heart is hard and I'm going to divorce. No, people harden their hearts and then they do things that they normally wouldn't do. So it's not like, the hard heart is the core, but from the hard heart, people make decisions. You understand? So from the outside, when your heart is not hardened, and someone says, oh yeah, we can't make it, we're filing for divorce, you don't understand. Why don't you understand? Because your heart is not hardened in that situation. But theirs have. And sometimes it's one spouse, sometimes it's both spouses. And so Jesus is saying that is the real issue. If you want to fix marriage in general, if you want to take it back to where how God intended, and it's this way, that he created you guys, and he created for marriage for unity, but you have allowed sin to harden your heart, and now you are looking for a loophole, and you're trying to put God on it. Moses had to regulate the wreckage that divorce was doing. And Jesus here is trying to restore, to say, I'm never going to tell you to go back to what Moses said. I'm going to tell you to go back to what God created. And I'm telling you, like, if you go to every situation you have, every problem you have, if you don't trace it back to its origin, you're just going to band-aid things that may need surgery. And so you'll suppress it for a season, and then it's going to come back out. And God always wants to heal with the heart. And this is why a lot of times we can't sit quietly with the Lord, because when we sit quietly, our mind becomes still, and he begins to cut us. And we're like, ooh, let me get a praise song. He's like, no, calm yourself down. Let me poke you in the place that is swollen and infected. The pain is not because I'm poking. The pain is that it's infected. So you carry the pain, but when God tries to correct that, we back off. And God allows us to. He's not going to be like, oh, let's put him under. He's like, no, you have to volunteer. It's interesting because when he died on a cross, he also volunteered. He was led. He was not taken. He was led, meaning that he allowed to be led. They led him. So Jesus is saying, I need you to come here. Be led to me. Be led to the surgical knife. Be led to talk about the hardness of your heart. Because that's the real issue underneath. I'll tell you, all issues is all gonna come down to this. Because from a hard heart, decisions are made, and things don't go well. Hebrews chapter 3 verse 13 says, but encourage one another every day. Man, maybe we should do this as a church. Like if you dismiss this, then your heart is already hardened, and it will harden. Be encouraged, but encourage one another every day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. So no one wakes up and says, I'm going to harden my heart today. Your heart becomes hardened through deception. So your heart, when it's hard, begins to ask, well, it stops asking, what does God want? But instead it begins to ask, how can I justify what I want? So if they're married, they're like, man, she burned them pancakes again. Technically, by this one scholar in the Hebrew world, I can technically divorce her, but I don't want her to just go off and die, so I'm just going to offer her a certificate. My grace to you. Here's a certificate of divorce. You know, and if one person does it, or two, it's one thing. But if you have a whole community, people of just, you know, it's like Oprah. Certificate of divorce, left and right. Everyone gets a certificate of divorce. That's where we are in America. Just, you know, no fault divorce, certificate of divorce. And Jesus saying, yeah, that's not my intention. But we're like, but legally, technically, and Jesus saying, loophole, loophole, loophole. And do you think it's easy for him to draw us from what we've already attached to, where he has to pry our hands off of either what we've been raised with or what tradition has says, what our culture has accepted? So he's not going to be like, hey, come, do it my way, do it. He's like, you're more than welcome to. I'm going to empower you to release, but you have to choose to release. This is why he's never about behavior. Someone smoking, drinking, partying. He's not like, don't do all those things and don't hang out with people who do, because you know, all that. That's religion. Jesus saying, why are you doing that? You're looking at porn, why are you doing that? What's beneath that? You're trying to numb your pain. Why? What's beneath that? It's not just stop drinking. It's finding out, why are you drawn to that? So decision starts before the actual decision. So I want to take you through a little bit of some steps of how do we get to the place, and potentially how did these people get to the place where they're like, hey, getting a certificate of divorce is as easy as getting breakfast. Because it's never just like you wake up and you're like, oh, today I'm going to get a certificate of divorce. Something happened. So usually, and this is the first step, is something happened. Something always has to happen. And the truth is, in life, something will always happen. You cannot avoid this. Something will always happen. But something happens, a wound, some sort of disappointment, a betrayal, some sort of maybe conflict, or maybe just a season of silence. And as a church, we kind of are familiar with like, God, what are you saying? What are you doing? And the silence is a thing that's happening. Silence itself is something that can happen. Or maybe in an unanswered prayer, right? We're like, man, God, I'm asking for one thing and you didn't do it. Something has happened. And then, so after that thing happens, then the next step close to it is now you interpret what has happened. So now you begin to analyze it. And it's not just an experience that you've had. Now you're assigning meaning to what has happened. Now you're saying, hey, man, they just don't respect me. The church never called me. They don't care about me. God never answered my previous prayer, so he's not listening to me. Or maybe I married the wrong person. You know, I thought we were in love and I'm just not feeling it anymore. And so because I'm not feeling it anymore, something has happened. But now it's like, hey, how am I interpreting? When people join Christianity or give their life to Jesus, sometimes they don't do it in a way that's authentic and genuine, and then it's disappointing because it's not what they expected. A lot of times people think they're going to join Christianity, and Jesus is awesome, and he's going to grant them their every wish and open every door, and they're going to fulfill their dreams that they've always had. And then you see them wreck and deconstruct and then say, well, I tried it. Something happened, maybe beyond what you expected or what you didn't expect, and then you begin to interpret it through a lens. And so then you begin to tell yourself the story about what happens, and that begins to shape within you months or even years before you actually make the decision. It's just brewing. It's just brewing. And every little thing contributes to it. Who knows what I'm talking about? Who's ever been there before? Come on, every hand, you know this is how humans work. Once things continue to brew, and then what happens, something really, really interesting. And this is when a lot of times the church begins to ask people if people leave or whatever, is this, that once you begin to create a narrative, then you begin to distance yourself. Husband and wife, you begin to live under the same roof, but yeah, that's about it. Your conversations are very technical and very informative, not inspiring, not deep, not intimate, because you've created, there's a distance. Because how we interpret things in our minds create the behavior that we begin to display. So now things have happened in mind. Now we begin to act. So we stop talking altogether. We become silent. We stop praying. We stop showing up. We stop pursuing reconciliation. We stop listening. We distance ourselves. And when you begin to distance yourself, something crazy happens. It begins to confirm what you originally thought. Because now you're distancing yourself, and their response to you just continues to feed what you've already decided how you're going to interpret what had happened. Have I lost anyone yet? No, good, because this is the unfortunate reality. So what began as a hurt becomes a separation, and then separation reinforces the story that we started to tell ourselves. And then the fourth level is that you start looking for permission, and this is where the loophole basically appears. Instead of asking, what does God want from me? You start asking, what is the biblical reason that would give me the freedom to do this? Who's ever tried to find a verse to justify your action? Every hand. Eric, I see you, both hands, brother. we all have said, God, I want to do this so bad, and I need a verse. And can I tell you, you find one. You'll find more than one. That's your loophole. this place puts you in a place of what's legally permissible. And so when you start looking at it in that way, this is where you say, well, technically, well, theologically, well, this is where you stepped into this place where you are in the loophole, and now you're just trying to justify everything. And this is where Jesus is like, but the reason that you're in here is because of the hardening of your heart, though. I'm going to get to that in a second. A loophole is often an attempt to make what we already want feel righteous. We even say, man, I've sat with this, and the Lord confirmed it. No, he did not. You just sat with it, and you confirmed it yourself. You guys have no idea how many times people tell me that God told them to leave. And I'm not even talking about church, to leave their spouse, to leave their job. And I'm like, no, you failed at your job because you were horrible at it. God did not tell you to leave. God released the other people from suffering from under you. That's what really happened. But if you want to tell your story, go for it. You're always right. God is always on your side. And everything, you turn it towards your advantage. Not God humbled me because I was a horrific person. Not I'm leaving the church because I just don't want to be confronted with things, or I just have broken relationships, or just be honest. Like whatever just be honest. But then at this point, when you're in this loophole stage, the decision is then at that point is already inevitable. As they say, the train has left the station. It's not invisible, but now it's visible. The departure is all there. There is, everything that you've done, whatever it is that you're doing, it's already on course because the decision is already. It's kind of like in a marriage. I heard of a story where, and this was so long ago too, where the husband's like, I'm getting a divorce. And like, why? So they're sitting in counseling, and he's like, because when you go to the bathroom, she puts on the toilet paper the wrong way. Like, and that was like the final straw that broke my back. And it's done. I can't believe it. But that is just the fruit of the decision that you've already made. You see what I'm saying? So we can kind of be like, well, because that's an easy fix, but that's not the problem. But we try to say that that's the issue. And so when you leave, I'm telling you, there's this other story where this preacher came to a church and ministering, and this woman showed up afterwards, and she's like, man, God spoke to me while you were speaking, and he told me that I'm supposed to marry you. And he was like, huh. And she's just going on about feelings and the vision and all this, and he's like, huh, that's really interesting. He goes, well, okay, I hear you. Let me go ask my wife and see what she thinks. A person makes a decision, and we try to spiritualize everything because we want to be righteous. We want to be like, look, I'm always on the right side. No, you're not. Welcome to church, because that's really where you are. And that's what Jesus is trying to uncover. You're trying to say, oh, look, Moses, he was so kind to us. No, he wasn't kind to you. He was kind to the woman that you were putting off, so that she's not bound to you and unable to remarry and live her life. Because then he flips it, he goes, your hearts is where the problem is. Not what Moses did, or not what your woman did. Your heart is the actual issue. So, before I finish this, a couple of things of how do you make the right decision. So let me just read these off real fast. Basically, ask yourself the question is, like, have I prayed about what I want or what God wants? Are you trying to align God with the direction that you're heading, or are you asking God for him to pull you out into what he's doing? Those sound similar, but they're two different prayers. Have you sought scripture, or have you, and what I said earlier was, did you just find verses to justify what you're doing? Have you sought wise counsel? There's people who make horrible decisions, and you find out about them, and you're like, wow, that was so dumb. Who did you talk to that told you that this was a good idea? Oh, nobody. Well, then you reap the consequences of your foolishness. There's so many people that you can, it's one thing to seek advice and get bad advice. All right, there's some sympathy there. But if you don't search for any advice and you do foolish things, then you win foolish prizes. There you go. That's just, so have you sought wise counsel? And Proverbs says, without consultation, plans are frustrated, but with many counselors, they succeed. And don't find people that agree with you. Find people who agree with God. Have you confronted with what is yours? So before asking what needs to change in someone else, have you asked yourself the question, what needs to change in me? Because when something is wrong, we always find things in other people immediately. But the question is, wait, maybe it was me. Maybe they have their issues that we can talk about. But maybe what I need to do is say, God, expose what's happening in me. Can you make a decision without demonizing someone? Sometimes we create villains because we need someone to be completely wrong so that we can feel justified. And in marriage divorce, the other spouse is always the enemy. Always. And I've sat with countless of couples. And at the end, if they go through it, they realize that they had a bigger role to play in it than they originally thought. Because God never tells you to point fingers at someone else. He begins to say, let's look at you. And if you really want any reconciliation, that's where you have to start. Because when you start with you, you realize how many issues you really have. And then God takes you on a journey to begin to deal with them instead of projecting them on other people. And then the final thing in this is can you surrender the outcome of what you're trying to decide? Can you surrender the outcome to God? Because a lot of times we ask God for things with the outcome in mind. If God tells you to stay instead of go, will you stay? If God tells you to go instead of stay, will you go? If God tells you to wait, will you wait, or will you make something happen in your own efforts? If I only obey God when He agrees with me, then I'm not fully surrendered. I think we bring so much to the conversation with God that we don't realize that we have presented this whole thing and we're like, okay, God better say yes. He better say yes. And he says, wait. And you're like, okay. Okay, God. I was like, wait. So in this passage, he's not just confronting divorce, he's exposing the heart that looks for the minimal requirement necessary to justify maximum freedom in your life. We want a just outcome. We're doing it through selfish means. So this is why Jesus is not like, hey, if you can find a way out, there's a loophole, go for it. He's more like, what does love, what does faithfulness, what does truth, what does surrender require of me? It is easy to tell people what it requires of them, but does it require of me? You know, I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to get into the final verses of the passage. I think I just want us to sit with this thought. Let's take a moment, and we're going to sing another song here in a second, but I just want us to just pause and close our eyes and just eliminate all distractions for a moment. And I want you guys to all of us to just ask ourselves this one question. No matter what situation you're in, no matter your circumstance, let me make it a little bit more soothing for you guys with a little bit of a pad. Don't be distracted by this, but this could be like the freeing moment for you this morning. Because maybe a lot of times you've just been looking for loopholes and so God has not been able to get through to you because you're just too busy stuck on what you can get away with, what's the minimal that you can do. And God is saying, and He wants us to ask, like, what does love require of you? What does love require of you? And those answers are different person to person, because for one person, and then when it comes down to your marriage, love requires for you to stay, even if they've cheated, even if they stole everything from you. God may ask you to stay. In another situation, God may ask you to leave. God may ask you to call the police and get your spouse arrested. What does God require of you? What does love require of you? Sometimes God will ask you, and love requires you to give more than you plan to serve longer than you plan to. Sometimes it just requires you to just wash the slate clean, forgive, reconcile, walk away. Other times requires you to take him to court, to pursue justice. This is why God just doesn't do a blanket statement to say, don't divorce for any reason. Just love everyone, accept everyone, overlook everyone, show grace to everyone. No, justice requires specific and precise decisions on our part. But what God is saying is that he's inviting us to do it his way, not the easy or convenient way. And I think in many cases, it's not going to take us long to realize that, hey, I'm being selfish. The things that I want really is for me. I just don't want to do this. I just want to do that. Don't hide behind religious conversation. Don't hide behind your traditions, behind what you've always known. Don't hide behind what culture says. Don't hide behind what the law says. Don't follow any of those. Have Jesus confront those and follow Jesus in everything, through everything. He will never leave you astray. He will lead you to righteousness. He will lead you to a river that flows. He will lead you to life.